You're at home with Melissa, and I'm glad you stopped by. Today we're in the grow room, and I know we've been here a lot in the past, but today we're not doing a grow room type thing. We're talking about earthworms. And there are more than 6,000 known species of earthworms on the planet, only 30 from the United States. Isn't that weird? We're in the US where we're filming. The funny thing is, I would expected that we would have had a lot more. I mean, we have all these different climates and different types as well, but nope, about 30. But why earthworms are interesting to us as the average Joe or Joanne is that they do a lot for us, for most of us anyway. I mean, if you're a gardener, if you do a lot of outdoor gardening, you already know that earthworms are good. I mean, think about how much time we spend just trying to get them to come to our gardens. You know, we put down cardboard or newspaper to create a place that holds in moisture to attract them to the surface and things like that. Some people go out and they buy them every year to just release them in the garden. We use them for composting to help break down vegetable matter more quickly. All these are good things. And a lot of people also buy their worm poop, which is worm castings. If you're not a gardener, you may have heard the term worm castings being bandied about without really knowing what it is. It's just another word for worm poop. And it's something gardeners love. A lot of people go out and they buy worm castings every year and they put them in their garden. Fishermen love worms to go fishing, of course, because it makes excellent bait. The fish just love it. They gobble it up. And if you have fish at home in aquariums, a lot of different species of fish are really good to be fed earthworms to. They love them and they're nutritious and they're good for them. So those are a few different reasons to have earthworms. And particularly if you're planning to feed them to your pets, you don't want to get them outside and bring them in. You know, if you're using them for fishing, sure, go catch them out in the yard if you want to go through that hassle every time. Or if you're a gardener, do all this different stuff to attract them in the garden and work really hard at it every year. You can do that, sure, no problem. If you're going to feed them to your aquarium fish, you don't want to catch them outside. You never want to, for any pet, don't take things from outside to feed them. Crickets, earthworms, anything, they can bring in pathogens that can harm or even kill your pet. You don't want that. You go through all that trouble to keep them safe, and then you're going to bring them an illness right to them? Nah. But I like growing my own earthworms. And I did it before. I haven't done it in a long time. So I'm just starting again this year for the first time in quite a while. And I like doing it myself for a lot of reasons. First of all, you can spend money to raise worms. You can do that if you want to. You can buy prefab derm farms that, you know, you spend I don't know how much on, but it's a stack of trays with a container at the bottom that catches the worm castings or what have you. A worm farm, worm composting kit. You can buy those. You can probably buy them in different department stores. I know you can buy them online. You can also buy worm bedding in sporting goods stores or anywhere. You know, because the people that are taking them fishing, they have some bedding in there for the worms. You can buy that. In fact, I have some in here. Shoot, gave away the secret. This is where my worms are. But I have a little bit of worm bedding in here because a fisherman friend of mine bought some worm bedding. He said it was really cheap and it was in his way and he'd lose it before he went fishing. So he said, here, take it. All right. So I threw it in with my worms. But you don't have to do any of that. You can even buy worm food if you want. Now that one, I don't know. That one cracks me up. To actually buy food for worms, I don't know. It just seems silly. You can do that. But to do all these things, you're spending money that you really don't need to spend. You're spending time that you can never get back. You might be, you know, each time you want worms, you're either going somewhere, risking waiting in traffic, waiting in line to pay for it. You're spending money, you're online, you're waiting for things to boot up. All that hassle, time and time again? No, not for me. It's just not for me. Because also, raising worms does some other beneficial things for you, and I'll tell you about that here in a minute. You can use this. I have red wigglers, and I did buy the starter worms because I didn't want to. I'll be feeding some of them to fish. Didn't want to risk getting my original worms outside and bringing something in. So I bought them. Bought some online. They were super cheap. But again, it adds up. You don't want to do that again and again if you don't have to. A lot of us don't. I don't. I just got the initial worms, and that was my only expense. This is a tote I've had for years. When I was a kid, I started saving things up for when I grew up and have my own home. Now, granted, a lot of that stuff I saved up as a little, 8-10-year-old thinking when I grow up, I'm going to want this in my house. No, they weren't things you'd want in your house. But I kept doing this as I got older, and I kept saving up for a house when I was younger and living in apartments until I got my own home and could open all these totes. And it was like giant Christmas finding out, gee, what all do I have? But I started saving things in totes, and my aunt gave me some things, and she gave me them in totes. And I have tons of totes, and I love them. I use them not just for storage, but for projects as well. And we'll be going over some more of those in the future. But right now, with the earthworms, I'll tell you how you do it. If you want to just have worms, and once you get those initial worms, just raise them, and it won't cost you a penny. An old tote you have laying around, or someone else has lying around, that they'll give you, nothing spent there. You get the worms. What you do is at the bottom, you drill some holes. Now, I know you can't see mine because they're tiny, they're small. Because all these is the whole way around, I have drilled small holes at the very bottom of the tote to allow any excess moisture to escape. Because your worms like things moist but not wet, okay? Basically, you can use as bedding, like I said, you can buy it. You don't have to do that. You can use newspaper, not the colored pages, just the black and white. Easy. And that saves you another problem too. I mean, you or someone you know surely has a subscription to the local newspaper or a national one, what have you, and you've got newspapers, you read them. When you're done, you either throw them into your garbage, and there it's taking up space it doesn't need to in a landfill somewhere, or you're taking them someplace to be recycled. Well, why don't you just recycle them yourself? Cut out the middleman. Just do it yourself. These worms are an excellent way. You just shred the paper up. You don't need a shredder. You don't need to be too particular. Just rip them into little strips, about an inch wide, something like that. You don't have to be particular. Just rip them into strips. Chuck them in there after you wet them. Now, when you wet them, what you want is you want them to be the consistency of a wrung out sponge. Like you've got these strips, you wet them up. If you hold them in a ball and you squeeze, a few drops might drop out, but you're not going to have a stream of water. That's what you want. And you just put that in there and put your worms in it. You've got your worms, you've got your bedding. Perfectly fine. And what do you feed them? You feed them vegetable matter. Like, you don't have to buy anything. You can use, say you're cutting up salad for dinner or whatever. You've got these extra stems and the little seedy parts inside potatoes. I mean, peppers. Potato skins. Chuck them in there. Chuck them in there. Coffee grounds. Used coffee grounds. After they cool, chuck them in there. They're already the right dampness. Apple cores. Apple peels. If you don't like your apple peels and you cut them off. Any of that stuff. You want to stay away from citrus because it can make it too acidic and kill your worms. And, you know, you're going through enough trouble. You opened a tote. You don't want to kill your worms. So just rip up your newspaper, put your worms in there, then you can start feeding them. And they eat, you know, it's said in a tote like about this size, 6-7 pounds of food a week. To be honest, I have no idea how much mine eat. I really don't. I don't pay attention to that. It's not important. Because you don't have to get all scientific or measure it. You can tell when they've eaten what you've given them. And they don't eat like munching things. Chop, 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 chop. They don't have mouth parts. What they do is they absorb the nutrients from it, and that helps it to break down. And so that's why they're used in compost piles. They help things to decompose more quickly. And basically what you're doing when you're raising them in a container, whether it be this or something you commercially made or trays you made yourself, you are composting. You're taking the newspaper, the coffee grounds, the vegetable stuff, except for not citrus, and stay away from anything prepared, stay away from dairy, stay away from meats, and just don't give them a whole lot of breads or pastas. You know, you can give them a little bit. Don't give them too much if you do, though. Basically, fruits, vegetables. And you can even give them grasses. If you're keeping your container of worms outside and you're raising them, you can even give them yard waste. Put it in there, you know, cut grass or whatever. And you can tell when they're about done because the stuff in here is no longer stuff. You know, your vegetables aren't vegetables anymore. They've digested them. There's not much of it left. And what you're looking at now is basically, for the most part, a pile of what looks and smells like dirt. That's what worm poop is. It looks and smells like dirt. It's not stinky, nasty, slimy, anything. Dirt. Basically, worm poop is dirt. In my opinion, someone might get particular about it and say, well, no, on a chemical thing, dirt is actually something, whatever. Worm poop's basically dirt to me. It just is. And so when it gets down there, you add some more. Make sure that the moisture stays about the right amount, that wrung out sponge consistency. Make sure it's like that. If you're putting in a bunch of, say, strawberries, they've gotten a little funny and you don't want to eat them, or grapes, things like that that are wet, that are really, really high in moisture, put in some more newspaper that's, you know, not quite as wet, and the things will stay that basic moisture amount. What you want to be aware of, though, if you are keeping them outdoors, is that they will freeze in the winter, because some species of earthworms, nightcrawlers included, if they're in the ground, they're going to burrow down deep, deeper than the frost line. I mean, obviously, when I'm saying this stuff, I'm talking about places that have cold winters. We do here, but if you're watching this someplace warm, you can raise them outside year-round, no problem. Just make sure that they stay rather cool. You don't want them out in the bright sunlight, because think about it. They live in the wild under the ground. They live in the dirt, and it stays cool there. It's not freezing cold where they're happy and living, and it's not warm. It's cool. So if you're raising them indoors, a lot of people keep them in the basement. My basement has problems, and I'm not going down there. So I'm actually raising them in one of the cooler rooms in my house, and they're perfectly content. I checked in on them. They're reproducing. They're making, well, they're growing. They're not reproducing yet. And I can show you actually some of the commercial worm bedding. I told you one of my friends gave me some. Look at this. This is all it is. It looks kind of like insulation from your house. Well, from some people's houses. And if you feel it, guess what it feels like? Wet newspaper. And I have wet newspaper in here because that's mine. And I have right here some parsley I threw in because it was a little yellow. I was growing it, and some of it I didn't use in time. And it was kind of, those leaves were going by the wayside. I threw them in. I'm going to give them some strawberries later too. So I don't give them a big bunch of stuff all at once. You probably could. To start out, you don't want to. But as they're eating and things are going down, you could give them a whole pile of stuff at once if you want. But I just give it as I go. It saves me from throwing my kitchen waste into the garbage, and I feel like I'm doing something good. I'm just basically composting with them in here, and they're happy. I'm happy. When there's enough of them, I'll be using them for the fish and stuff. But as I was saying a minute ago, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent. In the wintertime, night crawlers will burrow down. They'll keep going. They'll go lower and lower in the ground to get below frost level. These are red wigglers, and they don't do that. They all die in the winter. All of these ones, if they were outside, they would all die this coming winter. But to keep the species going, what they do is they lay eggs, and the eggs are encased in a little, basically in a cocoon, and that's what stays in the ground. They never burrow down deep. The eggs in their little casings stay in the ground, and when it warms up the next year, they hatch. And that's the next generation of little red wigglers. Like I said, night crawlers will go down below the frost line, and they'll live up to, I think, outdoors, it can be expected for them to live 2 to 4 years, or maybe outdoors around 2, indoors 4, whatever. That's about their maximum lifespan. And so I'm going to try to show you what this looks like in here right now. It's not pretty because it's a bunch of wet stuff. Slowly, so I don't dump it out on you. See, look, I've got just little bits of stuff. I've got that bedding that the person gave me. And the bedding will be digested as well, because the bedding's the newspaper or whatever. I think some people just basically raise them in newspaper, wet newspaper. But I like to use, in addition to the wet newspaper, vegetable waste. It solves a problem for me, and it gives them something that makes them happy, and then the stuff comes out the back end of them as really, really, really nutrient-rich stuff to put out in the garden. So, I mean, it's so helpful in so many ways. Why wouldn't I do it? And like I said, it's not costing anything. Zero. Absolute zero, except for the starter worms. I've got the tote that was already here. I drilled some holes in it. I've got the, and did I show you that I drilled holes all through the top? I don't know if I did or not, because this is not my first take of this. But bigger holes all through the top to make sure they get enough oxygen. And the little drainage holes in the bottom. And when they're grown up and I want to take them out, I suppose I could use a method where you basically have wire mesh with the smaller holes, and you pour them out and the dirt goes through and they stay on. I'm just going to dig in here, really. What I'll do is I'll dig them all out. I'll dump the worm castings out in the garden, and I'll take the worms themselves, and excuse me for my eye here, and I'll take them out and put them back in as soon as I fill it with fresh bedding, and then I'll start giving them the food again. And that's just when I want to, either it's getting too much worm castings in there, so I want to get them out to have more room for them to feed on more stuff, or if for whatever the reason I feel the population is getting too dense in worms and want to take some of them out en masse to just lower the population. I'm going to be using these as I go for fishing. I might throw some of them in the garden, and I'll be feeding some to my fish. So the odds are pretty against it getting overpopulated. But if it does, you know, and I could always, I don't mind, you know, for you, probably one tote will do ya. Because you might live alone, but you might not. You might just not want to be bothered with more than one tote. And so you can always, if it gets to where there are too many worms in there, just take some of them out and throw them out in the yard. They'll be happy. They'll do their little worm thing. Even if you don't garden, they're good for your yard. Or you can give them to someone you know who does garden, and they'll appreciate it. Same with the worm castings. If you get a lot of worm castings built up and you have to get rid of them, and you don't garden and you don't care to put them on your, you know, to put more dirt on your lawn, but if you know an outdoor gardener, you keep them supplied in worm castings, you're going to have a friend for life. And with overpopulating in the worm population you have going, if you don't have anything you really want to do with them and you're just raising them for fun, or if you only have so many you want to use, like say you're raising them to have a constant supply for fishing, but you find yourself with more than you can use and don't want to just keep expanding into more and more toads, you can share them with other fishermen. You know, make a nice gift, a nice way to say, hey, I was thinking about you. I like you. Let me share something with you. And it costs you nothing. Costs you nothing. It doesn't even really cost you time, because you can just chuck it in. You know, you have to do something with your food waste anyway, and you have to do something with your newspaper anyway. Chuck it in this bin instead of dragging it to somewhere or throwing it in the garbage. It's either the same amount of effort, less, or if more, not much more. You know, so that's a good idea. I really think so, and I enjoy doing it. And it's going to make my fish happy later, because they're going to have the other food to eat. And I'm even going to feed them to some species of fish that later, if I have the heart to feed them to my bigger fish as feeder fish, they will have eaten these worms, which will then go to those fish, who will then also go to my bigger fish. And I'm going to use them for the fishing, and I'm going to use them for the gardening. So for me to expand into multiple totes, that might be a good idea, really. I might need a lot of these guys. But anyway, now you have the basics of how to do this super, super easy and with no money at all, using just things you wanted to get rid of anyhow. And I hope it was helpful to you, or if it wasn't helpful, if it's not something you think you can use that you'll really enjoy for yourself, maybe it's a little project you want to work on with your kids. It'll teach them how to take care of something, and it's kind of the watching things change, and helps them learn about the different scientific processes about how things break down in the natural world around us. Could be interesting for them. But, you know, make sure that your kid has a little bit of patience, because you're not going to put them in here one day and the very next day have giant, giant worms and 20,000 of them. You know, they take their time. 3 months, whatever it is. It's not immediate, but still might be fun for kids. I know that it was something I would have liked to do as a kid. So anyway, thanks again for joining me. I was really glad to have you here, and you have a great evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Enjoy. Bye-bye.